Snow whipped across the empty streets of Chicago, stinging like needles against exposed skin. Clara crouched against the cold brick wall of a deserted alley, hugging her knees to her chest. Every gust of wind pushed through her thin coat, every bite of frost against her fingers made her feel smaller, more invisible. The scraps of bread in her paper bag were barely enough to keep her stomach from growling, yet she clutched them like a lifeline. Her breath came in shaky clouds, her eyes scanning the dimly lit street for any hint of danger, or mercy. Most people passed without a glance, wrapped in their own worlds, oblivious to the girl shivering on the sidewalk. Every footstep echoed her isolation, every muffled laugh from a distance reminded her of what she had lost, or rather, what the world had taken from her. Then the low rumble of a car engine cut through the night. Clara's head snapped up. A sleek black vehicle slowed to a stop near the alley. The tires crunched over the icy snow, and the door opened, revealing a man stepping into the cold. He was tall, immaculately dressed in a long coat, shoes polished, exuding wealth and authority even in the freezing dark. This was Ethan Caldwell, billionaire entrepreneur and philanthropist, known for his fortune and influence, but tonight, none of that mattered. What mattered was the fragile, shivering figure in front of him, clutching scraps of yesterday's bread like they were treasure. He hesitated a fraction of a second, aware that any sudden movement could scare her. Clara's eyes were wide, darting between him and the shadows behind, calculating whether this stranger would harm her, or worse, ignore her like all the others. Are you okay?" Ethan asked softly, keeping his voice low, steady. His breath formed clouds in the icy air. Clara flinched, pulling the bag closer. "Don't come near me," she whispered, her voice trembling, yet there was a strength in it that made Ethan pause. She had survived this long by being vigilant, defensive, untouchable. Ethan crouched slightly, making himself smaller, less imposing. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, reaching into his coat for the thermal blanket he always kept in emergencies. "Here, take this. It's warm." Clara's hand twitched, and for a moment, she considered running. The years of betrayal, of abuse, of people turning away, had left scars deeper than the winter wind. But the blanket, it wasn't like the others. It wasn't shoved at her. It wasn't offered with pity. There was something in the way he looked at her, a sincerity that forced her to hesitate. Slowly, cautiously, she extended her hand. The blanket met her fingers. She wrapped it around her shoulders, the warmth seeping into her bones. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to feel it, a sensation she hadn't experienced in years, safety. Ethan's eyes scanned her small form, noting the dirt streaked across her face, the raw, chapped skin on her hands, the ragged coat that barely covered her thin frame. "You've been out here long," he said gently. "Do you have somewhere to go tonight?" "No," she whispered, voice hollow, barely audible over the wind. "Nowhere." Her words pierced him more sharply than he expected. Not because of her plight, it was the magnitude of it, but because of the resilience in her eyes. Clara wasn't broken, she was surviving, holding herself together despite the world pushing against her at every turn. He glanced at the dark street, then back at her. There were no shelters open this late. No one would take her in. And yet, walking away felt impossible. His heart twisted. "Come with me," he said. "Just for tonight. I'll make sure you're safe." Clara's gaze hardened, suspicion etched into every line of her face. "Why would you care?" she asked, her voice low and sharp. The words weren't just mistrust, they were armor built over years of neglect. Ethan swallowed. He had expected hesitation, but not this directness. "Because, nobody should be out here like this. Not a girl like you," he said. "You deserve more than this." His words hung in the air, heavy with urgency and truth. Clara's hands clutched the blanket tighter. Her mind raced. He could be lying. He could be another stranger, another person who would turn away. But, something in his tone, in his eyes, gave her a sliver of hope. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she nodded. Slowly. Almost imperceptibly. Ethan reached out, guiding her gently toward the car. Every step was cautious, every motion measured. The snow crunched beneath their feet, the city's festive lights flickering in the distance, a cruel reminder of what life had taken from her. Inside the car, warmth enveloped Clara for the first time in months. She hugged the blanket tighter, staring out the window at the streets she had survived, wondering if she had made the right choice. Ethan glanced at her, noting her tense posture, the wary glances. He didn't say anything. Words weren't necessary yet. As the car drove through the quiet, snow-covered streets, Ethan's mind raced. Who is she running from? Why was she out here alone tonight? He didn't ask, not yet, but a gnawing sense of curiosity and concern settled in his chest. Have you ever wondered if you could make a difference for someone like Clara tonight? Comment below where you're watching from. Would you have stopped? By the time they reached the mansion, Clara's fingers were numb, but the blanket offered her a strange comfort. She stepped inside cautiously, her eyes scanning the grand foyer. The high ceilings, marble floors, and sparkling chandelier were alien, almost blinding compared to the alley she'd survived in. Ethan knelt to her level, keeping a gentle distance. You don't have to trust me yet, he said softly. Just stay for tonight. No one will harm you here. Clara's eyes flickered with doubt, but she allowed him to guide her through the unfamiliar space. Every shadow, every reflection in the polished floors made her heart beat faster. Survival instincts were ingrained, but, maybe this time, she wouldn't have to fight alone. If you've ever felt completely out of place, like Clara does now, drop a comment with where you're watching from. You're not alone in this story. Clara was led to a guest room. She hesitated at the doorway, her hand brushing against the doorframe. Ethan gave her a reassuring nod and left her to her space, closing the door softly behind him. She sank onto the bed, clutching the blanket, staring at the unfamiliar luxury around her. Trust wasn't immediate. It would never be immediate. But tonight, for the first time in months, she felt a fleeting sense of safety. Ethan, standing outside the room for a moment, exhaled deeply. He didn't know what secrets Clara held, what dangers her past carried, or how much of her story she would ever share. But one thing was certain, he would stay, and he would protect her, no matter what it took. The night outside was silent, snow continuing to fall in soft flakes, blanketing the city in cold beauty. And in that silence, a question lingered, a mystery that even Ethan couldn't answer yet. What had Clara truly endured, and who was still looking for her? Do you think you could have helped someone like Clara tonight? Subscribe now and comment where you're watching from. You don't want to miss what happens next. Clara sat on the edge of the guest bed, the blanket still clutched around her shoulders. Her small frame was tense, every muscle rigid from weeks of constant vigilance. The mansion, so bright and quiet, felt alien to her. She stared at the polished floors, the towering windows, the soft glow of crystal lamps. Everything screamed wealth, safety, and normalcy, a world she had never known and didn't know how to trust. Ethan stood near the doorway, observing her silently. He didn't want to crowd her, didn't want to force anything. This wasn't a place for demands, and he knew better than anyone that trust had to be earned. His mind replayed the alley, the cold, the snow-laden streets where he had found her. Clara hadn't asked for help, hadn't begged for a ride, yet here she was, letting him guide her into his sanctuary. Clara, he said gently, his voice breaking through the quiet, I just want to make sure you're safe. That's all. Tonight, at least, you don't have to worry about the cold or hunger. Clara's eyes flicked up, wary and calculating. And tomorrow, she asked softly, her voice almost swallowed by the air of the room. Tomorrow, will it be the same? Ethan exhaled slowly. I can't promise forever, but I can promise tonight. And for now, that's enough. Her gaze shifted to the small window. The city outside glittered with lights, festive and alive. Clara's fingers tightened around the blanket, her knuckles white. It wasn't just the cold that had trained her to distrust, it was every adult who had failed her, every hand that turned away, every home that had claimed to care only to reject her. Safety was a foreign concept. Comfort, even stranger. Ethan stepped closer, maintaining distance, his expression calm yet earnest. I know this is overwhelming. I won't force anything. You can stay as long as you need. Clara's voice trembled, a whisper barely audible. Why would someone like you care? People like you, people like me, we're not supposed to cross paths. Ethan's jaw tightened. He had heard this before, in boardrooms and charity events, people who thought the world was divided neatly into the deserving and the discarded. Clara's words carried a bitter clarity that no lecture could match. Because it's not right, he said simply. No one should have to live like this. No one should have to survive in silence and fear. For a long moment, Clara said nothing. She let her eyes wander across the luxurious room, her gaze catching the soft folds of curtains, the ornate moldings, the faint shimmer of polished furniture. She had survived abandoned streets, freezing nights, hunger gnawing at her stomach. Yet the world inside this mansion seemed so unattainable. Too much. Almost like a dream she didn't deserve. Ethan sat on a nearby armchair, keeping his posture relaxed. Do you want something to eat? He asked. I can make you something warm. Clara's eyes flicked toward the kitchen door. Hunger pressed against her ribs, but trust pressed even more. The thought of walking through the expansive hallway, letting someone guide her, made her chest tighten. She shook her head. No, not yet. Ethan nodded, not pushing. He had learned over the years that patience often accomplished more than insistence. Instead, he offered her something else, a notebook and a set of colored pencils he had left in the guest room. You can write, draw, anything. Sometimes that helps, he said softly. Clara hesitated, her brow furrowing. Drawing had once been her refuge, before life had stolen it from her. Slowly, she reached for the pencils, the action tentative, almost ritualistic. She began sketching shapes on the page, tentative lines that trembled like her voice. Ethan watched, realizing that these small acts, the blanket, the quiet space, the pencils, were steps toward something larger, trust. Connection. Safety. A sharp knock on the door startled Clara, making her flinch. Her hands trembled as she instinctively pressed the pencil into the page. Who is it? She asked, voice low and wary. Ethan approached slowly. It's probably the staff. Don't worry. Clara's eyes narrowed. Staff? Are you sure? Ethan nodded. Yes. But if it makes you feel safer, I can check. He opened the door to a young housekeeper, carrying a tray with soup and bread. Clara's stomach grumbled audibly at the smell, but she stayed frozen in place, defensive. The housekeeper smiled gently and placed the tray on the desk. I'll leave it here. Take your time, she said softly, retreating without another word. Clara exhaled slowly, relief washing over her. Hunger tugged at her, but so did fear. The mansion was luxurious, yet every corner seemed strange and intimidating. She hesitated before touching the warm soup. Slowly, finally, she took a spoonful, and the heat spread through her like a small miracle. Ethan sat back in his chair, keeping his eyes on her. See? There's nothing to fear here, he said, careful not to overwhelm her. Clara swallowed the first bite, her eyes flicking toward the window again. It's too much. I don't know if I belong here, she admitted, voice trembling. Ethan's expression softened. You belong anywhere you feel safe, he said. You don't have to justify yourself to anyone. Not tonight. For the first time, Clara let herself relax slightly, leaning back against the soft cushions. She wasn't fully safe, not by a long shot, but for the first time in weeks, maybe months, she could breathe without immediate terror. But even in this calm, there was an undercurrent of unease. Clara's past was still alive, and Ethan could sense it. She flinched at every shadow, every sound from the city outside. Her life had trained her for vigilance, and that didn't go away overnight. Have you ever felt completely out of place, like Clara right now? Comment below where you're watching from. Imagine surviving nights like hers and then stepping into a world so unfamiliar, it changes everything. Hours passed in quiet observation. Clara scribbled in her notebook, occasionally glancing at Ethan as he quietly read in the living room. The mansion was alive with warmth, but it also held questions, unspoken truths, and Clara's lingering fears. Ethan knew that no amount of luxury could erase the shadows she carried, but tonight, it was the first step towards safety, trust, and hope. The night deepened, and Clara's eyes grew heavy. She curled into the blanket, drawing it tight around her shoulders. Ethan checked the locks on the doors, ensuring no intruder could enter, his mind drifting to the unknown dangers that might still be lurking outside. If someone had ignored Clara tonight, do you think she would have survived? Subscribe now, and comment where you're watching from. You don't want to miss what comes next in her journey. Outside, the wind swirled, snow continuing to fall like whispers over the city. Inside, Clara slept fitfully, but for the first time, she wasn't on the cold streets. Ethan watched from the doorway for a moment, silently vowing, he would protect her, uncover her past, and ensure that the next night wouldn't be as cruel as the ones before. And yet, deep in his mind, a question lingered: what if her past wasn't done with her? What if the world that abandoned her finally came looking? The mansion was quiet, but the tension was far from gone. Clara woke to the soft glow of morning seeping through the tall curtains of the guest room. For the first time in weeks, she didn't feel the bitter bite of winter on her skin, though a lingering chill still hovered in her bones. The room smelled faintly of cedar and fresh linens, unfamiliar scents that carried both comfort and unease. She pulled the blanket closer around her shoulders and cautiously glanced around. The mansion was quiet, eerily quiet, but that didn't mean it was safe. Down the hall, the faint sound of footsteps reached her ears. Clara froze, every instinct from the street screaming that she should hide, vanish, disappear into the shadows. But the footsteps slowed near her door. Ethan appeared, holding a tray with a simple breakfast, oatmeal, fresh fruit, and a cup of steaming tea. His expression was calm, but his eyes carried the weight of vigilance. "Good morning," he said softly. "I thought you might be hungry." Clara's fingers hovered over the tray, hesitant. She had learned that generosity often came with strings attached, that kindness could mask danger. But this was different. Ethan had done nothing but offer warmth, food, and safety so far. Still, she kept her guard up. "I'm not used to this," she admitted, voice low. "People usually yell or ignore you, or worse." Ethan nodded, understanding more than she could imagine. "I know. That's why I'm trying to change tonight, not tomorrow. One day at a time." Her gaze shifted to the small window. The city outside glittered with lights, festive and alive. Clara's fingers tightened around the blanket, her knuckles white. She had survived abandoned streets, freezing nights, hunger gnawing at her stomach. Yet the world inside this mansion seemed so unattainable. Too much. Almost like a dream she didn't deserve. Ethan stepped closer, maintaining distance, his expression calm yet earnest. "I know this is overwhelming. I won't force anything. You can stay as long as you need." Clara's voice trembled, a whisper barely audible. "Why would someone like you care? People like you, people like me, we're not supposed to cross paths." Ethan's jaw tightened. He had heard this before, in boardrooms and charity events, people who thought the world was divided neatly into the deserving and the discarded. Clara's words carried a bitter clarity that no lecture could match. "Because it's not right," he said simply. "No one should have to live like this. No one should have to survive in silence and fear." For a long moment, Clara said nothing. She let her eyes wander across the luxurious room, her gaze catching the soft folds of curtains, the ornate moldings, the faint shimmer of polished furniture. She had survived abandoned streets, freezing nights, hunger gnawing at her stomach. Yet the world inside this mansion seemed so unattainable. Too much. Almost like a dream she didn't deserve. Ethan sat on a nearby armchair, keeping his eyes on her. Occasionally, he glanced at the way she clutched the blanket, the subtle trembling in her fingers. Every detail told a story of survival, of a life hardened by neglect. Imagine walking into a world you've never known, completely exposed and vulnerable, Ethan said softly. Could you survive it? Clara is surviving it tonight, but most people wouldn't stop. That's why you need to subscribe, you don't want to miss the next chapter of her story unfolding. Hours passed. Clara moved from the window to the sofa, her blanket draped around her shoulders. She stared at the pages of her sketchbook, lost in her own world. Ethan suggested books, but Clara was more interested in drawing. She pulled out a notebook and began sketching the snow outside the window. Her lines were careful at first, tentative, but gradually grew bolder, capturing the sharp contrast between the harsh winter world outside and the safe haven within. Ethan sat nearby, reading silently. Occasionally, he glanced at Clara, noticing the subtle shifts in her posture, the way she leaned slightly toward the warmth of the room, how her eyes lingered on the pages of her sketches with a hint of curiosity. She was beginning to allow herself to feel, even just a little. Hours passed. The day faded into evening, the mansion bathed in a soft amber glow from the chandeliers. Clara's defenses were still high, but the tension in her body had eased slightly. For the first time, she allowed herself to feel a fraction of trust. Later, Ethan led her to the kitchen, where he prepared a simple dinner, roasted vegetables, fresh bread, and warm tea. Clara watched silently, her fingers tracing the edge of the table. She didn't speak, but the subtle relaxation in her posture told Ethan more than words ever could. As they ate, Clara's eyes flickered toward the large window. The snow continued to fall outside, and for the first time, she felt the possibility that someone could care for her, that she didn't have to face the world alone. She's learning that safety is possible, but the shadows of the past are still close, Ethan said, glancing at her carefully. Subscribe now, you don't want Clara to face the next challenge alone. Night fell, and the mansion grew silent except for the occasional creak of floors and the soft whisper of wind against the windows. Clara curled into her blanket once more, her sketchbook resting beside her. She wasn't asleep, not fully, but the fear that had gripped her all her life loosened slightly. Ethan checked the doors, then paused near her room, looking at her fragile form. He understood that protecting Clara was no longer just a matter of shelter, it was about rebuilding trust, piece by piece, and confronting the dangers that had pursued her for years. Outside, the city's cold lights glimmered, snow continuing to fall like tiny whispers over the streets. Inside, a fragile peace settled, but it was only temporary. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new revelations, and new tests for both Clara and Ethan. And yet, for tonight, she was alive, warm, and seen, and that was enough. The mansion was quiet that night, save for the faint crackle of the fireplace and the soft hum of the central heating. Clara sat cross-legged on a plush rug in the living room, sketchbook open on her lap. Her pencil hovered above the page, tracing tentative lines, pauses stretched long as her thoughts wrestled with memories she hadn't touched in months. Ethan sat in the armchair across from her, reading a thick leather-bound book. He kept his eyes on Clara, careful not to appear intrusive. The earlier warmth of the mansion and the food had softened her edges slightly, but he could still see the tension coiled tight within her. Every flick of her pencil, every glance toward the window, carried the weight of streets, alleys, and nights spent alone. "You've been quiet tonight," Ethan said softly, his voice careful, deliberate. "Are you thinking about something?" Clara's fingers stiffened, pencil hovering mid-stroke. I remember things," she said quietly, her eyes fixed on the page. "Things I try not to think about." Ethan leaned forward slightly. "You can tell me, Clara." Whatever you want. I won't judge. Her gaze flicked up, meeting his eyes briefly before darting back down. The firelight danced across her face, highlighting the raw edges of vulnerability she rarely allowed anyone to see. It's hard, she whispered. I've lived in places where nobody noticed if you were gone. If you cried. If you froze. You learned to be invisible, or you didn't survive. Ethan's chest tightened. The alley, the biting cold, the crumbs clutched in her tiny hands, it all came rushing back. He had seen the surface of her struggle, but not the depth. You survived because you're strong, he said, his voice firm but gentle. But no one should have had to teach you that. Clara's fingers traced a faint line along the edge of her sketchbook. Her eyes, dark and wary, flicked toward the door and then the windows. And now, she asked. Now, I'm supposed to trust someone. A stranger? You're not a stranger to me, Ethan said, letting the words settle between them. I'm here to keep you safe. Tonight. And as long as I can. For a long moment, silence stretched across the room. The only sounds were the flicker of the fire and the scratching of pencil on paper. Clara's gaze drifted to the sketches she had made, lines depicting snow-covered streets, dark alleys, and shadowed figures, but gradually, the shapes softened, becoming something almost hopeful. I've had to hide, Clara whispered, her voice breaking slightly. Not just from the streets, but from people. People who hurt you. People who say they care and then, she swallowed, her chest tight with emotion. They follow you. They find you. They take what little you have. Ethan's heart clenched. Every story she told, every fragment of truth she shared, deepened the weight he felt for her. You're safe here, Clara, he said firmly. I won't let anyone hurt you. I'll do whatever it takes. Her fingers shook slightly as she set down the pencil. For the first time, she allowed herself to look up fully, into his eyes. There was fear there, yes, but also the barest glimmer of trust, fragile and flickering, but present. Hours passed. Clara began to speak more, sharing small pieces of her past, nights spent on cold sidewalks, foster homes that promised stability but delivered neglect, and moments of hunger that left marks she would carry forever. Ethan listened in silence, letting her words settle, understanding that hearing her story was part of the protection he owed her. The mansion's silence was interrupted only by a soft knock at the door. Clara flinched, pressing the blanket closer to her chest. Ethan rose and opened the door to a housekeeper, carrying a tray of warm tea and a small pastry. The subtle aroma filled the room, but Clara didn't move. You don't have to eat if you're not ready, Ethan said quietly. Just, take it slowly. Clara's eyes flicked to the tray. She took the tea cautiously, the warmth seeping into her hands and comforting more than just her body. For a moment, she allowed herself to breathe without fear, letting the mansion's safety settle over her. The firelight flickered across the room, shadows stretching along the walls. Clara spoke again, quieter this time. I don't know if I can ever feel safe. Even here. People from my past, they follow me. Ethan's jaw tightened. He understood immediately that her danger wasn't abstract. It was tangible. He had seen the signs, the haunted look in her eyes, the way she flinched at ordinary sounds. Then we'll face it together, he said softly. You're not alone anymore. Not now, not ever. Clara's fingers twisted the edge of the blanket. She wanted to believe him. But belief was dangerous, and she had survived so long by expecting the worst. Still, the warmth in the room, the safety in Ethan's voice, and the absence of immediate threat allowed a small seed of hope to grow. Ethan stood and walked over to the window, looking out at the snow-covered garden. Imagine walking through a world you've never known, completely exposed and vulnerable, he said, voice low but intense. Clara is surviving it tonight, but most people would have ignored her. Subscribe now, you don't want to miss how the next chapter of her story unfolds. Hours melted into evening. Clara moved closer to the fire, sketchbook abandoned for a moment as she simply sat, letting the heat seep into her frozen bones. Ethan quietly observed, recognizing the first steps of trust forming between them. Every small motion, every hesitant glance, told him she was slowly learning that safety could exist beyond the streets. The night deepened. Ethan checked the doors and windows for the third time, ensuring nothing threatened her. Clara's breaths came more evenly now, though occasional flinches betrayed the persistence of her old instincts. He knew that protection wasn't just physical, it was emotional, and that part of his job would take far longer than any locked door or secured gate. As she finally allowed herself to lie back on the couch, eyes closing briefly, Ethan reflected on the journey ahead. Clara's past was still a living shadow, but tonight had been a start, a fragile, yet vital beginning. Her journey is just beginning, Ethan whispered to himself, glancing at her sleeping form. Subscribe now, you can be here for every challenge, every twist, and every step toward safety. Outside, snow continued to fall softly, covering Chicago in a white, silent blanket. Inside, a quiet peace settled, but both knew the calm was temporary. Tomorrow would bring new tests, new revelations, and more steps toward trust. For tonight, however, Clara was seen, protected, and learning to hope, and that was enough to keep the fire in the room, and in her heart, alive. The first light of dawn filtered through the frosted windows, painting the mansion's library in soft gold. Clara sat cross-legged on a leather armchair, her sketchbook resting on the nearby table. The previous night had left her drained, yet something flickered inside her, a cautious curiosity she hadn't allowed herself in months. She traced her pencil along the edge of the paper, lines forming shapes that were tentative yet deliberate. Each stroke was a small act of defiance against the fear that had ruled her life. Ethan entered quietly, holding a tray with hot cocoa and a few pastries. He moved deliberately, careful not to startle her. Clara's eyes lifted briefly, scanning him, the motion guarded yet less rigid than it had been the day before. He set the tray down on a low table nearby. "You don't have to eat if you're not ready," he said softly. "But it's here if you want." Clara's fingers hovered over the cup, her body taut with instinctive caution. She had been taught to question every act of kindness, to measure intentions against a lifetime of betrayal. But the warmth radiating from the cocoa, the quiet steadiness in Ethan's voice, made her hesitate less than it would have before. Slowly, she took the cup, letting the heat seep into her fingers and bones. "You're beginning to trust small things," Ethan observed, settling into a chair across from her. "That's a start. You don't have to trust me all at once." Clara's eyes remained on the cup, tracing the rising steam. "Small things are easier," she admitted, voice low. "Big things. I can't risk them yet." He nodded, understanding. "We'll take it one step at a time." The morning passed quietly. Clara began sketching again, moving from abstract shapes to more defined forms, the snow outside the window, the sunlight reflecting on icy branches, the mansion's interior in muted tones. For the first time, her art wasn't a desperate survival mechanism, it was a bridge, a way to feel safe and express herself without words. Ethan watched, realizing the magnitude of what these sketches represented. Each line was a fragment of trust, a flicker of hope. He understood that protection wasn't just about food, blankets, or locks, it was about giving her the space to reclaim pieces of her life that had been stripped away. A soft knock at the library door interrupted the morning. Clara flinched, clutching the edge of the armchair. Ethan rose calmly. A young assistant appeared, carrying a small bundle of fresh clothing and a note. She placed the items down and left without another word. Clara's eyes lingered on the garments, clean, warm, functional, and for a fleeting moment, the weight of gratitude and fear collided in her chest. Ethan motioned gently toward the new clothes. "You can change if you want," he said. "No one will rush you." Clara hesitated. She wanted to, she truly did, but the act of letting go, even for a moment, felt perilous. Her past had taught her that every change came with risk. Every comfort could be a trap. Finally, with a deep breath, she accepted the clothes, retreating to the adjacent room to dress in private. When she returned, she looked subtly different, her coat replaced by a warm sweater, pants clean and sturdy. Her posture was slightly less guarded, though the alertness in her eyes remained. Ethan noted the small change. Each act of compliance, each moment of vulnerability, was progress. Later, they moved to the mansion's enclosed courtyard. Sunlight reflected off the snow-covered grounds, and the air was crisp but forgiving compared to the streets outside. Clara's attention wandered to the icicles hanging from the eaves, the way frost traced patterns on the garden statues, and the faint tracks of birds in the fresh snow. For the first time, she allowed herself to observe beauty without suspicion. Ethan joined her, walking slowly beside her. He noticed her glances lingering on small details, moments where her mind wandered from fear to wonder. "It's strange, isn't it?" he said softly. "You can see life continuing outside, even when it feels frozen." Clara's lips curved slightly, though she didn't meet his eyes. "Life keeps going, even if people don't notice you." He nodded, a quiet recognition of the truth in her words. "But tonight, at least, someone notices." "I notice. And I'm not going anywhere." By midday, they returned indoors. Clara moved to the study, drawn by curiosity. A small desk caught her attention, papers, books, and a pen set neatly in place. She ran her fingers along the surface, the clean order startling in contrast to the chaos she had left behind in her life. Ethan observed from the doorway, giving her space. He understood that her interest in the desk wasn't merely curiosity, it was a tentative exploration of safety, order, and control, things she hadn't had the luxury to experience in years. Clara picked up a pen and wrote her name on a piece of paper. It felt strange, almost revolutionary. Writing her name, in her own handwriting, in a safe space, small acts, yes, but monumental for someone who had been invisible for so long. Evening descended, and the mansion's glow softened the chill outside. Clara had eaten, sketched, and explored the interior spaces, each movement a cautious reclamation of autonomy. Ethan watched her quietly, aware that progress was incremental but tangible. "Imagine surviving everything the world has thrown at you, and still finding a place where safety feels possible," he said. "Clara is taking those steps tonight, but most people wouldn't stop to help. Subscribe now, don't miss how her journey unfolds." Clara curled into a blanket by the fireplace, sketchbook closed for the moment. Her eyes traced the dancing flames, letting the warmth seep into her body and spirit. She wasn't free from fear, but for the first time, she felt the faintest stirrings of hope and trust. The mansion was quiet, but outside, shadows still lingered. Clara's past had taught her vigilance, and Ethan knew that danger was never truly gone. But tonight, she was alive, safe, and taking her first real steps toward healing. As night deepened, Ethan checked the locks and windows, his mind never fully at ease. Clara's story was far from over, and he understood that the next challenge would test the fragile trust they had built. But he also recognized something vital. Clara was learning that safety could exist, even if just for a moment, and that was enough to sustain them through the night. Her steps toward trust are small, but crucial. Subscribe now, you won't want to miss what happens when her past confronts the present, Ethan whispered as he left her to rest. Outside, the city's lights glimmered softly through falling snow. Inside, Clara closed her eyes, letting the warmth and protection of the mansion wash over her, and for a brief time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, life could offer more than survival, it could offer safety, and hope. The morning sun broke through the icy gray skies, glinting off snow-dusted trees in the mansion's gardens. Clara stepped outside, her breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. She wrapped her coat tighter around her shoulders, her gaze scanning the distant city skyline. Even in safety, even inside warmth and walls, the shadows of her past clung tightly, like frost that refused to melt. Ethan followed silently, offering no words, only presence. He had learned that she needed space to confront her own thoughts, that rushing her or over-explaining would break the fragile trust forming between them. Clara's footsteps were careful on the snow-crusted path, but they carried a cautious rhythm, a sign that she was beginning to reclaim some control over her life. "Do you like the quiet?" Ethan asked softly, his voice carrying over the crisp air. Clara's eyes flicked toward him, wary yet attentive. "It doesn't feel safe," she admitted. "Quiet makes it easier for people to sneak up on you." Ethan nodded. "I understand. But sometimes, quiet is the only way to hear your own thoughts. To figure out what's real and what's fear." She said nothing for a moment, letting the wind tug at her scarf and whip strands of hair across her face. The mansion's vastness, the distance from the streets, was both comforting and intimidating. It reminded her of the power of someone else's control, a luxury she had never been allowed. Her eyes wandered over the garden, to a small, ice-coated fountain. She approached cautiously, brushing her gloved fingers along its edges. The water beneath was still frozen, yet clear, reflecting the muted morning light. Clara imagined it unfrozen, flowing freely, a symbol, perhaps, of a life she had never fully lived. Ethan watched her, sensing the symbolism in her movements. "You're thinking about freedom, aren't you?" he asked quietly. Clara's head tilted slightly, eyes narrowing. "Freedom is complicated," she whispered. "Sometimes it's safer to stay invisible, to survive." Ethan stepped closer, careful to maintain a non-threatening distance. "But you don't have to survive alone anymore," he said. "You've been through too much by yourself." Her fingers tightened on her scarf. Clara's past wasn't just a memory, it was a shadowy presence, alive and dangerous. She had learned the hard way that the world didn't forgive, didn't forget. Her voice dropped, hesitant. "People are still looking for me, people who, they didn't want me safe. They never did." Ethan's chest tightened. The alley, the streets, the faces she had avoided, they all flashed in his mind. He had seen the fear in her eyes the night he found her, but now he was beginning to understand its origin and gravity. "Then we'll face them together," he said firmly. "You're not alone. Not now, not ever." The day passed in cautious exploration. Clara wandered through the mansion's east wing, inspecting rooms she had never dared enter. Her movements were slow, deliberate, every glance measured, as though danger might spring from the polished walls or gleaming floorboards. She lingered in the sunroom, staring out at the snow-covered grounds, tracing lines on the frosted windows with her gloved finger. Ethan followed silently. He observed her, noting the small signs of vulnerability and trust, the way she allowed herself to breathe more freely in some rooms, the way her hands relaxed when she was not directly observed. He understood that every small victory was significant, a step away from the shadows of her past. Suddenly, Clara froze. Her eyes darted toward the perimeter fence, a figure in the distance catching her attention. Ethan followed her gaze, heart tightening. A lone figure moved with measured steps along the edge of the property, partially obscured by the snowfall. Clara's face went pale. "They're here," she whispered, voice barely audible. Ethan's eyes narrowed. "Who's here?" Clara shook her head, panic surfacing. "I don't know. They always find me." The figure paused, and Clara instinctively ducked behind a pillar, her body tensing. Her survival instincts, honed from years on the streets, kicked in immediately. She pressed herself flat, listening to the crunch of snow under the figure's boots, heart hammering. Ethan moved toward her slowly, raising a hand to signal calm. "Clara, I'm here." "They won't reach you," he said, his voice low but unwavering. For a long moment, neither spoke. The figure continued to pace outside, oblivious to Ethan's presence behind the glass doors. Clara's breathing was shallow, controlled, yet tense. Her mind raced, recalling every street corner, every dark alley she had survived, every betrayal that had taught her to fear being seen. Finally, the figure retreated, moving away from the property. Clara exhaled, a trembling sound that seemed to echo through the sunroom. She looked at Ethan, eyes wide with residual fear. "They never stop," she whispered. Ethan placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "Then we'll make sure they can't. You're not alone anymore." The mansion seemed to hold its breath in the aftermath of the encounter. Clara retreated to a quiet room, drawing a blanket around her shoulders and hugging her knees. She stared at the floor, processing the reminder that her past was not done with her. Each flicker of snow, each shadow outside, was a whisper of the dangers that still lurked. Ethan stayed nearby, silently observing, calculating ways to strengthen her safety. Protection wasn't just about doors or locks, it was about anticipating every threat, every move her past might make. Hours later, he brought a small tray of warm soup and a teacup to her side. "Eat," he said softly. "You've been through too much to go hungry again tonight." Clara hesitated but finally accepted the food. The warmth spread through her body, grounding her, calming the tremors of fear. She realized that, even though danger still lingered, she had someone willing to fight for her, someone who would face the shadows with her. Her pencil finally returned to the sketchbook. The lines were shaky at first, reflecting the fear still clinging to her, but gradually they became bold and deliberate, illustrating the mansion, the snow, and even the fleeting figure outside. The act of drawing was more than creation, it was reclaiming a sense of control, a fragile assertion of her presence in a world that had tried to erase her. Ethan watched, recognizing the courage in every line. She was not just surviving. She was starting to live, cautiously and carefully, but with intention. "Her past is relentless, but tonight she takes small steps toward safety," Ethan whispered. "Subscribe now, you don't want to miss how her journey unfolds." Evening fell, snow falling softly, blanketing the mansion in silence. Clara curled into the blanket, sketchbook closed for a moment, reflecting on the rare security she now had. For the first time in a long time, she let herself feel a flicker of hope. Ethan checked the doors and windows one last time. Every shadow outside reminded him that the night was temporary, tomorrow would bring new challenges. But tonight, Clara was seen, protected, and beginning to trust, and that small victory was enough to keep the fire burning inside both of them. The mansion's upper terrace caught the last rays of the winter sun, casting long shadows over the snow-laden gardens. Clara stepped outside, boots crunching softly on the frost-covered stone. The wind was biting, but the terrace's glass panels shielded her from the worst of it. She held the railing, looking down at the sweeping grounds, tracing the patterns of snowdrifts, footprints, and the skeletal outlines of hedges. For a fleeting moment, she allowed herself to breathe freely, to take in the calm without scanning for threats. The days had been long, layered with fear and uncertainty, but here, even in the cold, she felt a small flicker of possibility. Ethan emerged from the mansion behind her, holding a pair of warm gloves. "Here," he said softly, extending them. "It's freezing, and you'll need them if we walk the grounds." Clara glanced at him warily, but the gesture was simple, without expectation. She slid her hands into the gloves, feeling the warmth seep through her fingers. The small act was unexpected, yet grounding, another step toward trust, another layer of fragile connection. They walked along the terrace, stepping over icy patches, the city skyline glinting in the distance. For once, Clara's thoughts weren't consumed solely by survival. She allowed herself to notice the subtle details, the distant smoke curling from chimneys, the soft chime of a bell from the nearby cathedral, the way the snowflakes caught the light like tiny prisms. "This is different," she said quietly. "Everything is so still, and yet alive." Ethan nodded. "It's strange, isn't it? Life keeps moving, even when it feels frozen. That's the world you're stepping into, Clara. It's not all danger. Not everything is trying to hurt you." She kept her gaze fixed on the horizon, hesitant to acknowledge the unfamiliar warmth in her chest. Safety had always been temporary, trust always fleeting. Yet, walking alongside Ethan, seeing the world through a lens of quiet beauty, she felt a small, rebellious hope growing within her. Later, they moved to a side garden where the snow had melted just enough to reveal patches of grass. Clara knelt down, her gloved hands brushing against the damp earth. For the first time, she allowed herself to touch the outside world without fear, feeling the chill, the soil, and the life beneath her fingers. Ethan stood a few steps back, observing her with care. "You're doing something important here," he said. "Even the smallest steps toward trust are victories." Clara's eyes flicked up at him. "Why do you care so much?" she asked. "Most people just walk by. They don't stop." Ethan's expression softened, but he didn't step closer. "Because someone has to. And tonight, I chose to be that person. You deserve that, at least once." She said nothing, but the tension in her shoulders eased slightly. The words were not a cure, not a promise that everything would be perfect, but they were a thread of reassurance, a rare anchor in a world that had taught her only instability. They walked the garden slowly, Clara occasionally glancing toward the mansion as if checking for safety. She paused near a small bench, brushing snow from the seat. Sitting down, she let herself relax just enough to exhale fully, feeling the warmth of the gloves and coat seep into her bones. Ethan joined her, silently sitting nearby. "Do you ever imagine a life without fear?" he asked gently. Clara's gaze dropped to her hands, fingers intertwined. "I don't know if I can," she admitted. "Fear has been my only companion for so long. Safety feels strange." Ethan nodded, understanding the depth of her admission. "That's why we'll take it one moment at a time. You don't have to imagine everything at once. Just today. Just now." The sound of distant footsteps caught Clara's attention. She froze, scanning the perimeter of the garden. Her body tensed instinctively, muscles coiled like springs. Ethan noticed immediately. "It's fine," he said softly, placing a hand lightly on her back. "No one is coming close. You're safe here." She exhaled slowly, releasing some of the tension but remaining alert. "It's hard to believe," she whispered. "Even for a moment." Ethan's gaze followed hers toward the snow-laden path. "I know. That's why every small step matters. Every cautious moment, every bit of trust you allow, it's progress." Clara looked at him, a flicker of gratitude passing through her eyes. She shifted slightly, letting the warmth of the jacket and gloves remind her that she was being protected, not monitored. They returned to the mansion, where Clara explored a previously forbidden hallway, a small library tucked between two guest rooms. Dusty shelves lined the walls, filled with books and old artifacts. Clara ran her fingers along the spines, inhaling the faint scent of aged paper. It felt different from the polished grandeur of the main rooms, less intimidating, more accessible, more hers. Ethan allowed her the space to wander. Every glance, every tentative touch of a book, was a sign she was gaining confidence in her surroundings. Hours passed. Clara sat cross-legged on the floor, reading passages from a worn journal she had pulled from the shelves. Her eyes lit up at the words, the language giving her a fleeting sense of belonging she had never experienced. She read quietly, Ethan's presence a reassuring constant in the room. As evening fell, Clara returned to her sketchbook, this time capturing scenes from the garden, the terrace, and the soft glow of the mansion's interior. Her lines were confident, deliberate, a reflection of the trust slowly emerging within her. Ethan observed quietly, feeling the significance of her actions. These were not just sketches, they were acts of survival, expression, and reclamation. Every mark on the page represented a small victory over the fear that had dominated her life. Her past shadows her, but tonight she dares to feel a flicker of hope, Ethan whispered. Subscribe now. You can witness how each step brings her closer to trust and safety. By nightfall, the mansion's corridors were silent, the soft hum of heating systems blending with the distant snowfall outside. Clara curled into a blanket by the fireplace, sketchbook beside her. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to rest without immediate fear, knowing Ethan was nearby, vigilant and patient. He checked the doors, ensuring everything was secure, and paused to look at Clara. She wasn't free from the memories or the shadows of her past, but she was beginning to learn that safety, even fleeting, could exist. Each moment of trust she takes is a victory against her past, Ethan said quietly. Subscribe now, don't miss the next chapter, where the real challenges begin. Outside, snow continued to fall, covering Chicago in white. Inside, Clara closed her eyes, letting warmth and protection seep into her body. Tonight, she wasn't just surviving, she was beginning to live cautiously, carefully, but with hope. The mansion's grand halls were silent, shadows stretching long under the flickering glow of chandeliers. Clara moved cautiously through the corridors, clutching her sketchbook like a shield. The events of the past days had left her both exhausted and wary. She had learned that safety could be fragile, that trust had to be earned in small, deliberate increments. Yet tonight, a gnawing unease tugged at her chest, an instinct she had spent years perfecting in the streets. Ethan followed closely behind, his presence steady and deliberate. He didn't speak, he understood that tonight required vigilance, patience, and caution. Clara had been through too much for words alone to comfort her. They reached the mansion's west wing, a section Clara had rarely entered. Dust motes danced in the faint light streaming through tall, arched windows. The air was thick with the scent of aged wood and candle wax. Clara's eyes darted across the room, noting every shadow, every glimmer of light reflected off the polished floors. Her muscles tensed instinctively, ready for anything. Suddenly, a faint noise echoed from the far end of the hallway, a soft, deliberate tapping, like someone pacing on the marble floor. Clara froze, her pulse quickening. Ethan moved slightly ahead, keeping his hand near the doorframe for balance and protection. "It's probably nothing," he whispered, though his tone carried caution. "But stay behind me." Clara nodded silently, gripping the edge of her coat. Each step they took toward the sound was measured, deliberate, every creak of the floor beneath them magnified in the stillness. The mansion, usually a sanctuary, now felt like a labyrinth, shadows stretching and twisting with every flicker of candlelight. At the end of the hallway, a door stood slightly ajar. From inside, Clara could see only darkness. A chill ran down her spine. Ethan reached for the handle, his fingers brushing against the cold brass. He paused, glancing at Clara, ensuring she was ready. Clara's hand trembled slightly as she clutched the blanket around her shoulders. Her instincts screamed at her to run, to disappear into the night, but the trust she had begun to feel toward Ethan anchored her in place. Ethan pushed the door open slowly. Inside, the room was dimly lit by a single candle on a low table. Shadows stretched across the walls, flickering and dancing as if alive. And then Clara saw it, a small figure, hunched over a pile of discarded belongings, shivering violently. "Clara," Ethan whispered, his voice tight with tension. The girl in the corner stirred, raising her eyes. Clara recognized the haunted look immediately, the same fear and exhaustion she had carried when Ethan first found her. But there was another emotion there now, defiance, a spark that refused to be extinguished. Ethan stepped forward, hands open in a gesture of peace. "It's okay. You're safe here," he said softly. The girl's gaze darted between Clara and Ethan. Her voice was barely audible. Why would anyone help me?" Clara felt a pang in her chest. She remembered the nights she had spent abandoned, the bitter hunger, the cold. She remembered the flicker of hope she had felt when Ethan had first offered her warmth. And now, she saw it mirrored in the eyes of this girl, someone else who had suffered, who had survived against odds that seemed impossible. "Because, someone had to care," Clara whispered. Her voice shook, but there was authority in the admission, a recognition of the fragility of trust. The girl's eyes widened slightly, a mixture of relief and disbelief. Ethan knelt down, maintaining a careful distance, letting Clara take the lead. "You're not alone," he said. "Not anymore." A long silence followed. Snow fell softly outside, muffling the sounds of the city. Inside, the mansion seemed to hold its breath, the firelight flickering across the walls, casting long, undulating shadows. Clara's hands trembled slightly as she moved toward the girl, extending a warm blanket. The girl hesitated, then accepted it, curling into the warmth as if she had been starved not only of food but of safety and care. Clara's heart ached at the sight, memories of her own suffering flooding back. Ethan watched silently, understanding that tonight was more than a rescue, it was the beginning of healing, fragile but vital. He had not anticipated the emotional gravity of this encounter. Clara had found safety, but now she was tasked with guiding someone else through the same darkness she had endured. As the girl settled, Clara turned to Ethan. "We can't let her be out there again," she said, her voice firm despite the lingering tremor of fear. "We have to keep her safe." Ethan nodded. "We will. Together." A sudden sound outside, the scrape of metal against ice, made them all freeze. Every instinct Clara had honed on the streets flared. The mansion's silence now felt ominous, as though warning them of unseen dangers. Ethan moved toward the windows cautiously, peering out. The snow-covered ground stretched into darkness, empty except for the faint glimmer of the city lights. For a moment, relief washed over him. Then movement, subtle, deliberate, and chilling, caught his eye. Clara felt her stomach tighten. Her past wasn't done with her. It was following, waiting, watching. The realization struck hard, even here, within walls meant to protect her, danger could be closer than they thought. The girl in the corner looked up, wide-eyed and silent. Clara placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We'll face it together," she whispered. "You're safe now, but we need to be careful." Ethan's jaw tightened. He had prepared for threats, but nothing could erase the knowledge that Clara's past could reach them even in the sanctuary of this mansion. A sudden gust of wind rattled the windows, drawing their attention to the shadows outside. The night was falling faster than anticipated. Clara and the girl exchanged a glance, fear tempered with the faintest glimmer of courage. "Her past is relentless, and even here it creeps closer," Ethan murmured. Subscribe now, you can witness every challenge, every shadow, every choice Clara faces next. The fire flickered, casting long, eerie shadows across the walls. Clara clutched the blanket tighter around the girl, her own fear tempered by the responsibility she now bore. She had been rescued once, now, she was tasked with protecting another life, a delicate balance between survival and compassion. Outside, the snow fell heavier, masking footsteps, concealing the world beyond. Inside, Clara, the girl, and Ethan huddled together in the flickering light. Silence reigned, but tension thrummed beneath the surface. A faint sound, a footstep, a shadow shifting, sent a shiver through all three. The night was far from over, and the mansion that had promised safety now seemed a stage for the next unknown challenge. Clara's mind raced, but for the first time in months, she felt not entirely alone. Ethan's presence anchored her, and the girl's tentative trust reminded her that even in darkness, connection could exist. But the night held secrets, and the question lingered like a storm cloud: who was still out there, and would they find them before dawn? The mansion remained still, yet suspense hummed through every corridor. Clara's journey was far from over, and as the shadows lengthened, she realized that true danger and revelation were yet to come.